Good evening. Can you, on Zoom, can you hear us? Okay. Yes. Go ahead now.
Yes.
All right. Good evening. Can you, on Zoom, can you hear us? Okay. Yes. Go ahead.
Yes.
Is your audio on?
Is mine on? Oh, yeah. Yes.
Is your audio? Go here. Trying to figure out where that's coming from.
Yes.
Okay. Let's try that now. Can you all still hear us?
Can you say some more sentences? You were clicking out a little bit.
Sure. Can you hear us now? Okay.
Yes, much better.
Okay, now we can get started. I think we got all the technical issues worked out. Sorry about that.
All right, it's 5:01, so let's call this meeting to order. Why don't we start with a roll call? Heidi?
Kevin Bacon,
Here.
Carmel York, Tony Tallner,
Here.
Richard Pagnello,
Here.
Don Avila,
Here?
Ethelyn Thomas, Adam Gonzalez,
Here.
Jermaine Jones.
Here.
All right,
One.
we do. Let's do introduction of new members. And I believe Tony Tolmer, who was appointed at the school board meeting last week, is a new member. Would you mind, Tony, introducing yourself to the rest of the committee and the staff and public?
My name is Tony Tolner. Been a resident since the early 80s. I had businesses here in town for about 37 years. Recently retired. I started my own new business for a small business consulting and moving forward. I'm just excited to find out more about this process and how I can support this school you guys do. I'm really glad to be here. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for offering to serve. Congratulations on your appointment.
Thank you.
Moving on to election of officers. I have been chair for this committee for the past 2 years. And I want to make sure that there's opportunity for committee members to be chair and to make sure that leadership circulates throughout different people in the community. And I would like to, at this point, see if there are nominations for officers and what officer positions do we have in the bylaws? I'm sure I didn't check to see. We have a chair and a vice chair, I believe.
We have a chair and a vice chair, correct?
Okay. Is there any nominations for chair for the next year of the Oversight Committee?
I'd like to move this to continue as chair.
I second.
Are there any other nominations? No one coming forward? All right, why don't we have a vote on that then? All in favor of selecting myself as a chair for another year, say aye.
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 Opposed? Any abstentions? All right. Vice chair. I believe right now Carmel York is our vice chair, correct?
This is David.
Roll call vote.
Yeah, we'll take a roll call.
Oh, yes. Why don't we do a roll call rather than voice vote here?
Kevin Bacon,
Aye.
Carmel York, Tony Tallner,
Aye.
Richard Pagnello,
Aye.
Don Avila,
Aye.
Adam Gonzalez,
Aye.
Ethelyn Thomas, Jermaine Jones.
Aye.
Okay. Now I will take nominations for vice chair. Well, Carl isn't here. Is there anybody who would like to be vice chair?
Nate, yes, you just outline briefly what the job responsibilities of that position are.
I don't have the bylaws in front of me, but as a practical matter, I can tell you that if I'm absent, you will be chair of the meeting. I don't think there's anything else. We have Heidi who handles the secretarial tasks or, minutes. We have no budget because we're just built into the operations of the school district. So it's simply somebody to back up who you don't have to do a vote on if I'm not present. I don't think I've missed a meeting yet, but maybe someday.
And in general, just add on to that, since essentially the chair just operates through the agenda. And if there's any if there's a question or anything about, maybe putting something on the agenda, we might run it to the chair. Ultimately, though, any communication that goes out to the chair will go out to the remainder of the committee as well. So yeah, I think that's what the vice chair would do in Mr. Dayton's place.
Well, if I will nominate Carmel York, she's not here. I haven't asked her if she wanted to do it or not, but no one is stepping forward, and I think
Can
she,
I?
yeah.
Ms. York may be resigning from the committee and wants to be found a replacement. Her term is expired, and with her current commitment to the board, she will be stepping down, but she'll remain on the committee until we find a replacement.
Okay.
And Kevin, I would gladly do the team play and step up, but I do have a surgery coming up, and I don't know how that's going to affect my ability to participate. But I'm going to do my due diligence to try to get there.
Excellent. Thank you, Adam, for telling us, and I appreciate you showing up to the meetings.
Nominate Mr. Jones.
All right, there's a nomination for Charmaine Jones. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Can I decline?
You're going to decline?
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't think I have enough experience.
John, you're next on the seniority list.
I'm also going to be resigning my seat. So I am declining that particular role.
Mr. Pagnilla, I know you're relatively new to the committee. Would you mind, would you be willing to accept a vice chair nomination?
Looks like on the last one.
Yes. I will nominate Richard Pagnilla as the vice chair.
A second.
Are there any other nominations? All right, let's do a roll call vote.
Kevin Dayton,
Aye.
Carmel York, Tony Tolner,
Aye.
Richard Pagnella, Don Avila,
Aye.
Adam Gonzalez,
Aye.
Ethelyn Thomas, Charmaine Jones.
Aye.
Motion carries.
And Mr. Day, before we proceed to the next item, I do just have a kind of a brief presentation regarding the roles and responsibilities for the COC.
Sure, yes.
Let me go ahead and do. I'll share my screen so that those of you who are remote can see. I'll leave it in this view here. Otherwise, I'm afraid if I go into presentation view, it's going to mess up what you guys can see. So just briefly, I wanted to provide an overview. Typically, we do this if we have new members or if the start of a new year. So just to briefly outline what the roles and responsibilities of the COC are. So the school board's responsibilities, I'll go over first. So the school board's responsibilities are for approval of projects and expenditures related to the bond. And everything I'm talking about is related to the Citizens Oversight Committee as it pertains to reviewing of Measure P and Measure I bond programs. So in that context, the MPUSD board's responsibilities are the approval of projects and expenditures, determining financing methods, appointments of citizens to the Bond Oversight Committee, establishing the bylaws, delegation to district staff, and overall implementation of the bond program. As the board has certain responsibilities, part of the committee's responsibilities is to inform the public. So it's to review the expenditures of the bond program. It's to advise the public, and it's also to review and report on any of the expenditures. So what you'll see later this evening is a review of the expenditures of the bond program. So in essence, it's to review those expenditures to make sure they're in line with the ballot language in the bond program. And if there's questions and things, feel free to ask that, and we're always able to provide that information. In addition, the committee shall ensure bond revenues are used only for construction, reconstruction, rehabilitation, and replacement of school facilities, and may include furniture, equipment for the schools or acquisition of real property, and ensure that no funds are used for teacher administrative salaries unrelated to construction under the bond. So you will see salaries in the bond, but it's all related to implementation of the bond program. Not within the committee scope, participating in the actual bond seller issuance process related to decisions, determining how the bond funds shall be spent, participating in bid process for contractors or consultants on bond projects. And committee members should seek superintendent's permission before visiting job sites or construction projects. And if that is the desire of the committee, we can always arrange that. So if we do, you can make a request, we'll make sure that's arrangement. There's some items that we have to follow. We are a Brown Act committee, so we have to follow the Brown Act. So there's certain things that we must do in order to make that possible, but we absolutely can arrange that. And then lastly, the limits on the committee members must abide by the government code provisions which prohibit public officials from having any financial interest in the contracts made in their official capacity, and also subject to the Political Reform Act of 1974 and its conflict of interest provisions. So that's just a brief overview of the board's responsibilities and the committee's role. Are there any questions around that?
The last statement you just made, if I understood you correctly, says that none of us are allowed to have anything to do with any kind of financial negotiations. Is that what you said in terms of conflict of interest exclusion kind of thing?
Correct. So as far as that's relation to the Political Reform Act of 1974. So it's essentially a conflict of interest. So you wouldn't, and maybe I can give an example here. If you were, say, a contractor and you had multiple jobs within the district that were related to the bond program, there potentially could be a conflict of interest that may prohibit you from serving on the Citizens Oversight Committee.
Any other questions for Ryan?
Yeah, I just have one of them. Sorry to keep on you one other question.
Sure.
We got two things that had, and I just want to make sure. Well, I'm sure we need to review a lot of this stuff. But one is the COC committee report, and one is the annual report of the board. Are these essentially the same, looking at two different things, or?
Those are agendized items, but they're two different things. So one is looking at a quarter of activity, one is looking at the full fiscal year of activity. Okay. So the annual report looks at the complete year. The quarter is just going to be the specific quarter that of that financial activity that's outlined.
Okay. And the fiscal year is calendar, or is it June, July?
We're July 1st to June 30th.
Right. Okay, thank you.
One thing anybody want to do is, I know this is on the website, probably make sure that all the committee members have a copy of the bylaws and also the relevant section of the education code, in particular the education code, which explains what we're supposed to be doing. That will explain the annual report and the audit that we deal with certain times of the year, just so that everybody has the documentation to know and be able to read what it is. Anyway, if the government code, if it's not too long, send that one out too. I think links would be sufficient.
Absolutely.
Excellent, thank you. And Mr. Toll, that should probably answer, but it's pretty clear in the education code what we're supposed to be doing, so it's not a lot of technical knowledge.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For the presentation.
Let's go to public comment. Is there anyone from the public who wants to speak concerning items relevant to this committee but are not on the meeting agenda? Thank you. All right, item E, review and adopt minutes of the November 3rd, 2021 meeting. And actually, I did have a question about this. It looks like D and H, at least on the surface, appear to be duplicates, and F and J appear to be duplicates. And I can't remember for sure if there was something different that we did there. I know we had a whole bunch of things we looked at, But we should probably, if they are different things, have something in the title or the text that indicates a distinction between them. Does anybody remember?
What are you referring to? I'm
Okay.
sorry.
So I'm looking at the draft here and it says,
The draft minute?
yes,
Okay.
it says review financials for Measure P and project updates. And then there's an explanation. And then it says here for H, review financials for Measure P and project updates.
We were reviewing multiple quarters for P and I. We were reviewing quarter April through June. And then we were reviewing the second quarter, July through
Okay.
September.
You know, I think it would be good just for the header on that, because I noticed for the warrant activity, we did have the listing of the dates. If we could for D and F indicate that was,
Oh, you want to, I get what you're saying. I would
Yeah.
take the dates as well at the
Yep.
top. Understood. I'll make that correction moving forward.
great. Does everybody understand what I had asked for the change to minutes, so that people know we looked at different quarters for those? All right. Okay, well, based on that amendment, does anybody want to make a motion to approve the minutes as amended? Is there a second?
I'll second.
You want to do a roll call here for this?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Kevin Dayton,
Aye.
Carmel York, Tony Tolman, Richard Pagnella,
Aye.
Don Avila,
Aye.
Adam Gonzalez,
Aye.
Ethlyn Thomas, Jermaine Jones.
Sorry, aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
All right, very good. Now we're going to get into the review of the material. And since we have at least one new person here, Ryan, you'll notice what we've developed over the past couple of years of the Oversight Committee, which I think everybody on the committee has enjoyed or appreciated. We've got a whole bunch, we've got a couple of cross-reference lists that we look at where we look at the expenditures from two different viewpoints to make sure that there's nothing that's questionable. There's also an overview financially, which is the first thing that's brought up. And the goal of this, and not everybody does this, but we go through the tedious task of going line by line, page by page. And anybody who has a question about any of the expenditures has a chance to ask it. In that case, we've got we're doing our job for the voters by making sure if something is reported that it actually falls within the requirements of the ballot measure. So Ryan, I'll pass it to you and we will start with.
Excuse me, Kevin, I'm sorry. There is a mistake on the agenda with my position. I didn't know if we were approving the agenda or not, but I am listed there at Community at Large Seaside. I am actually Community at Large Monterey representative.
Okay.
That'll be corrected.
Yeah, I'm Monterey, I'm actually Marina.
Okay, I'll make those
And, I think
corrections.
Ethelyn may be Seaside.
We're so close, I didn't.
Good eye.
We will fix that.
Okay, so we'll get the three of those fixed. All right, let's go to the financials for Measure P and project updates.
Okay, so
Page one of the packet.
page one, and what I'll do, if it's okay with you, Mr. Dean, is I'll just give an overview of this, and then you want to go through page by page. Is that
Sure.
how you like to do
Sure,
it?
well, and after the overview, we'll ask if anybody has any questions, and then we'll get to the long news.
Sure.
Are we starting with the committee report or the annual report?
Me.
This is the are we on F? Review financials for Measure P and project updates. Is that correct?
Yes.
Page one.
So this packet has F, G, H, and I. Then for J, review and discuss the annual report, we'll get into this thing, which has to go before the board under the education code.
So as I mentioned earlier, there are two bond programs. There were two voter approved bonds. There's Measure P, which was approved in 2010, and then there's Measure I, which was approved in 2018. So the first we'll look at is Measure P, that is the older of the bonds. We'll look at the fiscal activity for that, and then later as a subsequent item, we'll actually look at the detailed report or the warrant report, which outlines what payments were made to what contractors or vendors. So the first, or I guess it's page 1 we're looking at here. This gives an overview of Measure P and 2010 general obligation bond. It was 110 million to date. All but, or for this quarter, all but around $3 million, 2.9 has been spent. So this bond program, the goal of this bond program was to be fully expensed this fiscal year. And so going forward, we'll actually, as a committee, we'll go down to just having to review one bond program, which we Measure I.
Any questions about the last fragment of money for Measure P and its financial status? All right, let's move on to the project activity chart here, and that would be the page that says page 2 at the bottom. And what we usually do is, Brian, maybe you can explain how this chart is organized, and then we'll just go through the pages and see if there's anything that anybody has any questions about.
Sure. So you'll see this on this particular report is that you'll see the number just refers to the line number there. The district project, so there'll be a couple of headings. You'll have the site number, which is the number, and then you'll have the site description next to it. So for instance, the first site there is 019. That's associated with Hayes Seaside High School campus. Every expenditure will fall under one of those headings under a school campus that the expenditure took place at. Column B, column, I guess that's the third column. Measure P expenditures from Series C. So part of a bond program is you don't receive all of the funds at once. So if you pass a bond, you get those in series or issuances. So there were 4 issuance on Measure P. And so you spend those in the order that you receive the money. So any money that we receive from the first issuance has been spent. Our Series C, Series D. Now we're just looking at Series D only. So A, B, and C have been fully expensed. We're just looking at Series D issuance. And then you'll see the total combined expenditures for that project. And that's how both bond programs will be laid out.
All right, so the key here as you look through these is if you have any questions about acronyms, if you have any questions about, for example, what does administrative cost mean? This is the time as we go through page by page to ask those questions. So, for example, let's just do a practice one here for page 2, district office administrative cost, which has an 18,000 expenditure from Series D. Since we would know exactly what that is, could you explain that and why it would be authorized for the bond measure?
Absolutely. Administrative costs are the salaries associated with the employees we oversee. So that's our project managers. That's Jody. So Jody is the accountant who oversees the bond program. So she has helped develop, or she actually works side by side with our consulting firm to develop these reports. So that's where you see administrative costs. And district office, it's 090 or 090 is the district office site code.
Regarding administrative costs, once in a while you might find somebody who says, oh, you're not supposed to spend money on salaries. And actually, when this original bill was, when voters in 2000 approved Proposition 39, which is what this is under, actually you are allowed to spend bond money on personnel who are directly related to the construction program, which sort of makes sense because, you'd have to go out and from your general fund and get all this money to fund people who work under this. And there's actually been decisions from the state attorney general saying that this is the case. If you see something that's teacher related, that's one of the reasons why we have an oversight committee, because believe it or not, in the 1890s, there were actually school districts in California doing that. They were diverting money and claiming they could get away with it. So just to explain that administrative cost. Are there any questions about page 2? Well, that's actually it for page 2. Okay. Now, the vendor report. This is the cross-reference that I mentioned before, that we look at this from 2 different angles. Ryan, maybe you could explain how this is organized, and then we can go through it.
So this is, this will be covering the physical activity from October 1st, 2021 through December 31st, 2021. And how this report is laid out, similarly, it will have the school site where the expenditure was made. However, the first line you'll see there is what vendor or contractor or who we paid that particular amount of money to. So you'll see and I'll just go over the first one. You'll see the California Department of Education. There was a fee paid to them for a project associated with Central Coast High School's culinary program. And then it outlines the expenditure type. So that was CDE fees. So that's California Department of Education. There were fees that we had to pay to them. The date on which it was paid, the reference number in the invoice, and then the type. The description provides a detail on how that was paid. And the amount, obviously, is the amount for that particular. If there's multiple, then they'll be summed up at the very bottom line. But that one only had one expenditure, so you only see the bottom line is $1,540. And that will be laid out for every vendor for activity for that particular period of time.
All right, let's begin. At page 1 of the vendor report. Take a look and ask if you have any questions about the individual expenditures.
Noticed down under ICDMC. Okay, so the block, the dark block that says DMC construction, that starts there, the invoices they paid we paid 2 invoices on their behalf.
Yes, associated with that project. So you might see them, you might see multiple schools like there. So if there's a vendor that we have multiple school sites, you may see multiple. But for that particular vendor, there was a payment made for Monterey High School new classrooms, and those were
Any questions on page 1 of the vendor report? Page 2. Any questions on page 2?
Just a general question, not specifically about this page. If it's on this list, what is it process? I guess my question is, have all of these items that were paid already been discussed in other formats and approved ahead of time? Is there another process with another committee, or is that just, are we just approving the fact that these were paid? Do we know that these were all part of the original plan, or is that something we worry about?
So what the board oversees the project approval. So any of these projects that you see here, for example, we'll go back to the culinary classrooms.
Sure.
So the board takes action to approve that expenditure. So they approve the expenditure, they approve the contracts to the construction agency, they approve any architectural designs, anything associated with the project, the Board of Education will take action on. Okay. So those are approved projects. Then the committee determination, or to review rather, is to see, is that particular item in alignment with what the bond language was for. So when you have a ballot measure, it goes before the public, and it outlines what those appropriate expenditures are. So it can be for construction, our particular, I can get the ballot language for ours, but there's a large category of things that could fall underneath that umbrella as far as what the voters approved for the bond language. And so the committee's review is to make sure those expenditures fall in line with what's allowable. So as Mr. Dayton said, if you saw Monterey High School had administrative salaries paid to teachers, that would be a valid question. Why are we paying teacher salaries out here? That's not appropriate expenditure.
So I guess, Mr. Altmeyer, so we're looking at this. This is for Hayes Central Coast High School culinary program. We paid $1,540 in plan check fees. I guess my question really is, that was, so the board approved $1,540 at the beginning, and so these numbers here match what was approved. Do we know that already?
Correct. The board approves the expenditure. So even though there may be an original plan, right? Let's say there's a project that's, I'll just say $10 million for a project, let's say. So all of the board will ultimately, all of these warrants go in front of the board as well. So there's a report that goes every board meeting that goes to the board that outlines all the checks that are paid to every vendor across the district, not just related to these projects, but every vendor. But then also agendized on each board item is the contract. So if the contract originally was, say, 10 million, and it has to exceed that for some reason, then that also goes back to the board. So the board authorizes the full expenditure amount for the project.
I see. So what we're looking at here has already been authorized by the board, even if there's an overage, the board has already seen it and approved it.
That's correct.
Got it. Yes.
Yes, in fact, if you really want to get into this kind of stuff, you can look at the agendas for each board meeting. They come up every 2 weeks, and all this stuff is categorized. And actually, some of the board members fairly routinely ask to have an item discussed a little more before they approve it. So we just serve as a check and balance. But watch the board and see if you feel that they're doing a good job in making sure this all complies. So there's lots of opportunities to catch something that's going off the board, but good questions.
So I appreciate you indulging my ignorance. I'm just trying to understand the process, and that was a good explanation. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's look at page 2 here in the vendor report for Measure P for the 4th quarter of 2021. Any questions?
Legal fees. It was charged and uncharged. For Lorenzo Smith, Monterey High School legal charges measure.
They're referring to the line item under legal fees. There was an expense for 7987, and there's a reversal of that. Was it?
It probably had to go to a different project.
Right. So it's just there was a charge for that, and then it was moved out of that particular. It didn't belong in that under that category.
Okay. Is there anything that does belong in this category?
No, as part of this expenditure report, no. So you see all the activities. So if there's a debit or a credit, you're going to see both. Even though if they balance out to be zero, you're still going to see that after that.
Okay. Thank you.
Page 3.
Yes, sir. I've got a question. Again, we talked about administrative salaries and all that, and I get all that, but I see $18,000 in staff benefits in the course of 6 days. And I'm sorry, no, in the course of, 3 months or two months, whatever. Can you just explain what staff benefits are?
Yeah, that's Jody. So it says staff benefits. It's Jody's pay for the oversight of that program. So for that 3-month activity, that's the amount of her salary for that particular point in time. So that includes not only her how much money she actually makes in check, but all the other statutory benefits and all the other things that are associated.
Thank you.
If you look at the reference column, you'll see a PR denoted there. That stands for payroll.
Oh,
And
I see. Okay.
sometimes you'll see an IFC.
Yes.
That might be a correction in a benefit that perhaps got paid incorrectly. But all of this is related to salary and benefits.
Okay, thank you. Are you an employee of the district?
Yes, I am.
Okay, thanks.
Any questions about page 3? Page 4. Any questions? Page 5.
Mr. Baden, I'm seeing a grand total of 364,000. What is that a total of?
So that I can answer that if you like. So that's if you go back to page 2, it was. So that's all the fiscal activity. That's the total dollar amount for the fiscal activity for that period of time.
Thank you.
Yes, and when that number at the bottom of the project activity matches the total for the vendor report, you know it's been done right. And if you want, you can have it. All right, moving on. We are now done with item F and item G. Is there any public comment about these items? All right, let's move on to H. Review financials for measure I in budget updates.
Similarly to measure P, measure I, it was a bond program passed in 2018. This was a $213 million bond. There is money still outstanding. So this bond program has still 95 million that has not been issued yet. So those are bonds that the district still has authorization to issue at a future date. And so measure I was set in 2 issuances. So the first draw out of the measure I bond was split between a small amount of 13.6 million, around 13.7 million in short-term allocations, or what we're calling measure I Series A, and then you have a long-term, which is considered things be repaid over a 30-year period of time. And that's measure I Series B, and that's why you see the multiple breakdown. So as reference to the sheet, you'll see 2 issuances. You'll see Series A and Series B. The delineation being is that we tried to charge things that were short-term in nature, technology, those sorts of things, to Series A, and anything that was a longer term of building, something that's going to be around for hopefully longer than 30 years, will be charged to Series B.
Mind asking a question?
Absolutely.
So we have, when you say the measure I was how much?
213 million.
Okay, so is that all issue? So we approved that in 18. Boom. Where does all that money come from? Obviously, we're as taxpayers, we're paying our property taxes, that's added on to, right?
Correct.
Do you get the whole 211, whatever the number is, immediately, or does it go into an account, or are there? I'm just trying to understand the mechanics of the bond measure itself.
Absolutely, that's a great question. So the way that it works is that the Prop 39 bonds cannot exceed $60 per $100 of assessed value. So essentially what that looks like is we work with the tax assessor. They determine what those property tax rates are. We work with our financial advisor. They determine, okay, this is how much, based on current assessed valuation, how much money the district can draw off the amount that they were authorized to have. In our case, the maximum amount based on the assessed valuation at the time, when we drew this down, I think it was 2019, I think the first issuance happened, that was $118 million. So no, we couldn't get the whole 213 because we couldn't exceed that $60 per $100,000 of assessed value. As assessed values go up, that allows you to tap in to issue more, so that you're able to issue more. So what you do is you have an issuance schedule that outlines when do you think you're going to take the first amount of money, and then how many years down the road are you going to tap in and get the additional amount of money that's available. That's your question.
It does, but is that linked to? I mean, obviously, you say, but we believe that the assessed value will go up 10% for the next each year for the next 3 years. But what if it only goes up 8%? Do you still get your money, or do you have to wait until it does meet that assessed value threshold?
That you first put this together, you review what's called an issuance schedule. You take an estimate of what you think the growth will be, right? Assessed valuation. In our case, we were very conservative. I think it was a 3.5% or 3.25% growth. We know we've exceeded that. So based on that, you build a schedule saying, okay, if we just had a 3.5% or a 3.25% assessed valuation increase, when would we be able to get each series? So we had initially planned for 4 issuances over the course of, I think, 10 years. I have to go back and look at the original schedule, and that's based on that. If the valuations are higher, if the assessed valuation grows higher, that just means you can get the money quicker than you'd anticipated. And if the assessed valuation drops lower than your projections, then obviously would have an impact on when you can get the money. You may push that further.
I mean, you have to slow your project down.
Potentially, or just you wouldn't be able to get money. So what you typically do is you have money that's you set a bond, you set how much money that you're going to pull out based on the projects that you have, and then you assign those 2 projects. So you don't want to withdraw money out and then have another project that you're not going to do for, say, 20 years or something, right? You want to have an immediate plan to do that. So you typically outline your projects and then get money to correspond with those projects.
I have a small question about basically the format of the slide here. It's hard for me to see the colors in the key, and I'm wondering if you can add to those pie charts what they are. So for instance, in the round pie that says $95 million, remaining pending authorization, could you put that description right in that pie? Because it's very hard to see the difference between blue and green and to read that in the key.
Yes, we can work with, we can work on that. We'll see if that's possible. I don't see why it wouldn't be, but we could definitely work on it. Or even maybe just changing the colors of the graphs
Or
to make it more
making
visible.
these bigger to where they're easily identified.
Or where you have the key at the bottom of the colors and add the actual totals there and have the totals tied to the color right underneath.
Yeah, yes, some way to see that more clearly. Thank you very much.
If the little squares bigger. you tell better.
We can work on that. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I can understand your questions because actually bond measures are very difficult to understand. I wrote a 300-page paper about this in 2015, and I'll send it to you. And I tried to write it in a way, I mentioned it in my applications so that regular people could find out what's going on. One thing is this school district, I think, does an excellent job with its oversight and how it spends its money. Some school districts are really bad, and you'll get to see this, but you happen to be in a great school district that does a good job with its money. So, but these are good questions. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people are saying, what is series? What do you mean? Who buys these? Who buys these bonds and why do people buy them? It's a whole world of bond brokers out there, and they're always coming around selling things. So it's an interesting world here. But this school district has not been, as far as I'm concerned, sucked into the rackets that go on in some school districts. Just really struggle to manage their fiscal affairs.
And it tends to be more prevalent with more money, where more money is involved, then you have bigger fish.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. Thank you for being on here. And I know a lot of people on this committee know other places where things, money is not spent properly. And our job here is to try to keep that from happening.
Kevin, excuse me. Would you send your paper to the whole committee that you just mentioned you would send to the gentleman you were speaking to?
Yes, I will send it and you can decide if you want to do it or not. And that would be good. In fact, there's probably a few other things out there we could send, but I'll definitely send this one. Keep in mind, it's not an official Monterey Peninsula Unified School District paper, but I wrote it and I think it will give you an idea of how bonds work and what to watch out for.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Any questions about the Measure I financial overview? Good points on the colors. All right, we will move on to reviewing the warrant activity. Actually, Ryan, explain what warrant means, because some people might not actually understand the use of that word in this particular context.
So just to confirm, we're moving on to item I. We're on I. Okay. All right. So this is the detailed expenditure similar to Measure P. So you're going to look at a vendor breakdown to what payments were made to each vendor, broken down a little bit further by the project that it was at. So once again, you might see multiple vendors and multiple projects underneath those. So the warrant is what we call just a check that we pay to a vendor. So we issue warrants. That process, the checks are done. We don't actually print the checks here. The County Office of Education handles that for us on behalf of all the districts in the county. So once we determine the payment's ready to be made, we go through our financial system. The paperwork is attached, filed, and then submitted for payment. And then those checks are issued to, most of the time, I think, believe Jody, they come here and then we mail them out. There are some exceptions to that, but yes, typically what that is.
Yeah, whenever I hear warrant used in this way, it sort of feels like something archaic from the 19th century. And really, other than this, the only time I ever heard about warrants is when, you remember when the state government used to shut down routinely and people would be paid warrants instead of actually getting money. But that's what a warrant is. So thank you, Ryan, for that.
We don't like changing the finance rule. We like to keep everything the same.
Standards.
All right, let's start with page 4. This is the Measure I. This is the project activity section, and we will look, of course, at the vendor report later. But this is looking at payments based on school site. So for Measure I, page 4, let's begin.
Just to make sure I'm on the right place here, are we starting with ARC Document Solutions from tonight elementary? Am I in the right place or am I on the wrong page?
I think we might have, I just want to confirm, are we on item, Mr. Dayton? Did we move from, we were on H, we were reviewing the updates, which is document that.
Yeah, you know what, actually, project.
Okay.
We're in each project. Let's call these project updates.
Okay.
The more an activity review, the vendor list.
That's correct. So that document would be the document following, or the page runs the document following the graph breakdown of Measure I.
Says page 4 at the bottom.
It should still be in the same report, Mr. Palmer. The one that says committee on the front of it.
Okay. thank
It's
you.
the same report. It's just gonna go into the several pages back after Measure Ps.
Okay.
And it should be right. You're just about there. I can help you with that.
Yeah, I think you're there.
Thanks.
You good?
No, I'm
Oh,
not.
you said, okay.
I've got paper everywhere and I don't think I'm in the right place.
Right. Looking at that right now. Page 4, right? Measure I.
Okay, great, thank you.
You're welcome.
We all remember our scary first day on the street. All right, now we are all on page 4. Let's look, are there any questions about any of the line items here? Moving on to page 5. Any questions?
Just a quick question. You got a line item there under Marina High School campus. For Marina High School, then it just says science, medical, old locker room, MAHS for 931,000. That's a pretty abbreviated explanation for a lot of money. I just wondered. Is there an
Yeah.
explanation for that? Just.
Sure.
I
So
just
that is
just wonder what it covers.
yeah, so the titles for these are, we're limited by our financial system. We can't have, unfortunately, names, so we do have to abbreviate them. This was a long one. So this was actually improvements to Marina High School. It was improvements to the existing facility, but we converted it into a science medical facility. So we have some career pathways there for medical science. And we converted some of the old locker rooms in the, it was attached, I believe it was attached to, it was essentially old locker rooms. Marina High didn't have a gym. We built the gym for Marina High. So these are for some of the old locker rooms that we renovated as well.
Now, was this all centered on one building per se? So all the expenses for the science portion of the building and the locker. So it's essentially all one building that's being used for an allocated particular things, correct?
Moving on to page 6. Any questions?
Yeah, emergency repairs.
Emergency repairs under Marina High School? Is that Seaside High School?
600,000.
Yes, actually what happened was, the main sewer line, broke and backed up into the snack shack. and practically ruined the building, the flooring, the walls. We had to have a vendor come in and assess for lead paint and asbestos before it could be cleaned up and basically reconstructed. So not only did the sewer line have to be repaired, but the building that it really deteriorated had to be fixed.
Prior to the incident, was the building in use with children? Were the children using the building? I mean, or before this happened? Is this, I'm trying to get a
This
frame
is the
on,
snack shack. I believe it's.
The
by
snack shack?
Bill.
It's the snack shack. It's by the Lisa High School field.
so it's a separate home building, separate, okay, never mind.
Fortunately, there was nobody in there at the time it happened. It's not something that they use during the school day. It's when they have events after school or sporting events. They use that.
It's just, you concerned me when you said lead paint or asbestos.
Yeah.
So it's an older building.
It's a precaution.
Almost all, we have to take that precaution to all of our buildings because they're almost all of them are of the age where that was an issue,
Yeah,
especially the former military schools. It's always an issue there with asbestos.
Regularly, board meetings and emergency occurs, especially for the old forward buildings. And then they go in, and wasn't there something a couple of years ago, you found that maybe wasn't built right, or there was no foundation or something? There was something weird.
There's a lot of weird things that we find. We dig into those. They had different standards back then. Sure.
It's good.
That's why we have the division of the state architects now, for on a state level.
And just in general, I should mention, oh, sorry, Mr. President.
We talked about the snack shack down by the football field.
Yes. Yeah, that's the area we were talking about.
Looks like you could build a new building for about 100,000.
We actually looked at that. We actually made that assessment, and it was actually a lot less expensive to repair. It was expensive work, but it was less expensive to repair that than it was to reconstruct it. Yeah, that is an analysis.
How big is that building?
It's about as big as this room.
Yeah. So it's pretty big, and there's yeah, I don't have an exact split, you know, that.
There's a couple of restrooms.
There's some restrooms.
The restrooms beside it, but the work area is just about as big as this room.
Yeah.
Yes?
Kevin or Ryan, it brings up a question for me about all the sewage lines in Seaside High School. We all have spent a great deal of money on that campus. And I guess it's a little surprising to me that there's old sewer lines that are erupting, causing over $500,000 to fix. So I guess my question is, with the money that we put into all those new buildings and such, has there been an evaluation of the quality or the difficulty of the sewer systems?
It's like I said, we have old facilities. I do want to steer us back to the realm of the COC. So we're kind of getting into the kind of looking at projects
Yeah,
and
what the board of
questions that they might
trustees-
ask me. It is a good question. But yes, we do have some old facilities. Things do happen from time to time. And in general, when you see emergency repairs, it is something that couldn't wait, right? So we have emergency. We try to avoid emergencies as much as possible, but some things will happen. And so you'll see a few on here. So there's still expenditures that are falling under the authorization of the bond program, and they would have been replaced potentially anyway, but emergency made sure that they had to happen sooner rather than later. So leak, sewage backup, those sorts of things.
Thank you.
For these sewer lines, you know, if they're installed correctly and to California code, you'll get at least 50 years out of them before you start seeing problems with what was actually installed. So when you look at the expense, also think of it like in the frame of like 50 years, like how much per year would this cost be? You spend it out for its lifetime. That's kind of how I think of it, like a depreciating asset.
Well, kind of here, for instance, I'm not sure who asked that question a moment ago, but if I want to come back and ask another question offline, if you will, and obviously it sounds like we're straying away from our job here.
Right.
If I had a question about that, would I address that to you, or how would I?
Yes, you can always bring your questions to me. I'm more than happy to answer them if I'm able to. Sure.
Thank you.
And once again, this stuff appears before the school board, and there's There's plenty of room in a board meeting to usually to say something if you want to, or they're still doing hybrids. So, you know, if you watch those board meetings or even just look at the agendas, you get a lot of information about what's really going on. I remember that popping up. Any other questions on page 6? Moving on to page 7. Any questions?
Would you describe again what spread holding means? I'm sorry, in item 33.
Sure. So spread holding is where we place. So we have project managers or construction managers who oversee the construction of these projects through a consulting. The work that they do is billed to those projects directly. And while we're doing that, we temporarily bill their hours to a spread holding account, and then we distribute that based proportionally across the projects at the end. So while we're incurring those expenses, they go into a holding account, and then we distribute those out proportionally based on project costs at the end of the year. I believe we do that. We do it.
And you'll see that in the annual report.
Correct.
Thank you.
Just to confirm for anybody in the public, the student laptops are being purchased with short-term bonds, not 30-year bonds, correct?
That's correct. That's Series A, which is the short-term financing.
All right, moving on to the vendor report. So we'll go right to says page 1 in the bottom right, vendor report detail, with the first line with the dark background being ARC document solutions. So start taking a look at these and see if you have any questions. Any questions on page 1? Page 2.
You just explain, I see some expenses and some debits, and more expenses under Alpha Land Surveys. It was just a question of that activity being relabeled. I see that there it says $6,600 and then $6,600 reversal, and then changing it down there to maybe a different reference or something and adding the $6,600 back in.
That's correct. At times, as you know, school accounting has long account lines, and at times they are incorrect. And upon review, then I will do a journal to correct that and put the expense where it should be.
That was just basically a mislabeled expense.
Yes,
Thank you.
it could have been the wrong site, or it could have just been the wrong account line.
And you have intimate knowledge with it, and you feel good about it. So,
Oh, absolutely.
okay, then that's
Yeah,
good
what
enough
I
for me.
do has to be reviewed and approved before I can post any correcting journals. They have to be reviewed and approved by my supervisor, and then I'm allowed to post them.
Cool. And it just shows you the level of detail in this report. So for example, you see that where it was originally charged went under the expenditure type, and it was corrected later to be a different expenditure type. So you see that level of detail here in the report. And so as Jody goes through her process, like I said, something may initially have been mislabeled through the internal audit process, and things are corrected as we close out that activity.
And Jody, who is your supervisor that approves those changes?
Jody, so Jody works in the business services division of the school district. She has an immediate supervisor, director of fiscal services or director of business services, and then I oversee the entire operation.
And who is that person that's just over her, just so we know who the players are?
Her supervisor is Susan Zybel.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions about page 2? Moving on to page 3. Any questions? Page 4. Any questions?
Yes, sir, just see a lot of CDE fees, California Department of Education, I'm assuming CDE, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, all these fees, is there, are they just processing fees that they charge you to handle your paperwork? Is that the way it works?
Yeah, so we're under the Division of State Architects. So DSA, you might see it abbreviated. So that's the authority that oversees all the public school construction. So they make sure everything's up to code, make sure all the standards are met. They ultimately approve the plans that we submit to them. They're a division of the California Department of Education. So that's why you see those fees.
Page 5. Any questions? Page 6. Any questions?
Yes, sir, is this emergency repairs, is that the same 600,000 we saw on the previous document?
Yes, it just names the vendor who did the work.
Thank you.
Page 7.
I'm sorry, I see here, this is a vendor report, right? Okay. So I see the 600,000. But where's the vendor name? Is that the next one? Is that Commercial Solutions Group?
Correct. Yeah, so this one will, the heading will be the vendor, the subheading will be the project.
Okay, oh, I see, thank you.
Page 7. Any questions? Page 8. Any questions? Page 9. Any questions? Page 10. Any questions?
Inside Investments, is that where you bought the laptop? Is that what that means?
Insight Investments. Yes, that is the devices were leased. So Insight Investments is the company that the lease payments were made, or the leasing firm that financed them.
So Ryan, going back to your answer to the gentleman, to the previous question, you said the first title for example, Inside Investments is who you're paying. And then the second title, B6, other costs. B6 is the project. Is that correct?
Right under, so if you look at Inside Investments, you'll see a subheading underneath that says District Office Student Laptops. So you'll see that's the project. And then the expenditure type is the type of expenditure it was, and then that's the detail for that expenditure.
Okay, so B6 equals other costs. And for instance, C4 equals other construction. So
Correct.
you define each of those. Okay, got it.
For Monterey High School field, are the legal fees, which I see are added and subtracted. Is this related to the community lawsuits against the school district?
This is just general legal fees for that project. So any fees associated with the project that may require legal advice, it will be charged to the project as it corresponds.
Any questions on page 10?
So then to ask, so the fact that there's a negative 43,794.90 means you've paid that invoice.
No, that would mean that. So then it looks like that would have been moved to a different, there was a debit for it, and then there was a subsequent credit. So that must have mean it was moved to a different project.
And we'll see that coming up where it was moved to.
You should see that, correct.
Okay.
Yeah. You should see.
Page 11.
Maybe not in that dollar amount, because it might have been further broken down, right, as it was moved over, but yes.
If it's broken down, how will we know if it's, like, it's this one credit that we're seeing?
The tally for the total expenditures will still balance. So
Oh, okay, it's still
It's
balanced.
still balance out. Yeah,
Okay.
that's why we do the debit and credit. So it may have been one charge, say 43,000. However, that 43,000 may have been part of 3 projects that was moved to across different projects.
Okay, so, but it'll be, it's not like it gets scattered. Dust.
No, so that it
all stays in
ultimately will
its own
balance
bracket.
out.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Any other questions on page 11? Page 12. Any questions? Page 13. Any questions? Page 14. Any questions? Page 15.
One question before we move on, page 14. Meteor Education LLC. Is that all for classroom equipment or?
They're a classroom furniture equipment supplier. So that's the furniture equipment to furnish those new classrooms or the classrooms we reconstructed.
Thanks.
Any questions on page 15? Page 16. Any questions? Page 17. Any questions? Page 18. Any questions?
Let's see here, page 18 at the bottom. Let's see, I'm just looking at the vendor, where that vendor's list starts. Is it on page 16? Or is that RGM is that RGM that runs 3 pages?
Yes, that's correct.
Is that correct?
It starts on the vendor starts on page 16, I believe. Correct.
They're just a general construction firm, RGM.
Yes, they do our construction management, project management, help with those sorts of activities.
I think that's one of the reasons why the school district doesn't get involved in messes like others do. Page 19. Page 20. All right, any more questions about the project updates and warrant activity for Measure I? Are there any public comments? Let's move to item J, the annual report. Ryan, would you like to talk about the annual report and how it's done?
Absolutely. So as part of Prop 39, the law, there's really only one thing that the COC must do as far as producing something to the school board, and that's this annual report. The annual report can look very different. Certain school districts have a verbal report they do. Some school districts will do a letter from the Citizens Oversight Committee. What we've started here in practice is combining the reports that you review each quarter into one annual report that outlines the entire fiscal activity for the year in question. So this is, we're doing a look back. It's always a look back. This is 2021. We're looking at the fiscal activity. So this report here, typically how we do that is the committee will review the report and make suggestions or changes. We'll do that. And ultimately, if then we'll bring it back for a vote. And this will be moved on to our school board for review. How it's happened in the past is the chair has come in and briefly spoke on the report. But like I said, this is one way to do it. We can have a conversation about that, but this is the report that the board is used to seeing and the committee is used to producing.
I can tell you, as somebody who's been presenting these the past couple of years, the school board loves the new way that we do it with the project updates and the warrant lists. They're very pleased with how the oversight committee is operating. Nothing but great words from them from the work that we're doing. So, you know, I think providing them with this makes them confident that there's lots of accountability, proper checks and balances. Those verbal reports are the one-page propaganda pieces that other school districts do. I would consider that to be acceptable. And this is excellent. But do people have any comments, committee members, about whether or not this is adequate, too much? Any comments?
Maybe, I just heard you comment that the school board approves of the format and the information that this particular annual report is providing. Was this your the format that you brought to the table or the committee brought to the table, or was this a request from the school board in terms of how they'd like to see the information presented?
This was the committee's doing, and I think it was 2 years ago when we just started discussing in earnest how we wanted to do it. I'm not sure that there's any other oversight committee in the state that does this cross-referencing. And I can't, you'd have to go back and look at the minutes, but we ended up doing it this way. And, you know, they're pleased with that because you can see first the schools and what's happening at them and check on that. And also you can check to see who are the companies that are making money off of this. And, you know, for those two ways, I think the committee felt if there's something going on that shouldn't be, we're going to catch it this way.
It was the iterative process. So we actually spent multiple meetings refining this report, committee did. So yeah, that's kind of, it came organically out of this committee through various different ways we used to present it. And then ultimately, this is the format that we, at the committee, agreed to land on. And then I think this is the third year, I want to say, third or second.
So Charmaine here, I just want to bring up the fact that the bond measure, or not the bond measure, the state statute about the bond committees says that our committee needs to develop a report to give to the board. And what I'm understanding, and again, I'm new, this is only 1.5 years for me, that heretofore, what we're looking at is what staff has developed with input from the committee. And as I said last fall, I didn't get a committee to help me with it, but there is a best practices report that just the committee members develop. And it's a one-pager, and we bring to the board of directors as our own report, as opposed to a staff-produced report. So again, that's what I'm learning in my reading about best practices. And it was left on me to just do that by myself if I wanted that done. I don't particularly think that's an appropriate way forward. I think, you know, I need to have a committee of at least 2 to work on that, to bring it to the board as a report out of the committee as opposed to the staff.
So a couple, thank you for that, Ms. Jones. I think a couple of clarifications. If there is any meetings that fall outside of the general committee that and board committee members are meeting, that would be subject to the Brown Act. So that have to follow a formal process for similar to how we do these meetings. I do have, and I think, is this out the document? We do have the document that you shared at a previous committee meeting. So now would be an appropriate time, if you would like to have that conversation as a committee, you could discuss I think what you're referring to is the annual compliance opinion. Is that
Yes.
that one? So if we can circulate, so we can send it, and if you would like to talk about it, we can even put it up on the screen. Or we could do that at a subsequent committee meeting. We do meet quarterly, so it wouldn't be for another few months until we meet again. June.
So that's a very good point about the Brown Act, and how would, say, a subcommittee to develop that report work? How would you recommend that, Ryan?
Typically how they're done is the board, and we'd have to agendize this, but the committee would determine if that's something that they would like to have, then they would develop a subcommittee. That may, and I have to go get clarification for this, that may also be something that our school board actually has to do before the committee does that. So I'd have to look into that for you. But in general, how the school board does a committee that's subject to the Brown Act is they determine that they will have a subcommittee. They appoint board members to the subcommittee. And then when the meetings are set, they're published in the same manner that any other meeting is. So that it's posted 72 hours prior to the meeting. It's available open to the public in the same format as this. So they have to follow all of those similar requirements. Public notice is provided.
Okay, yeah.
This quorum is meeting, why do you have to have Brown Act?
Even though a committee isn't making decisions, so they're not actually making any decisions. And really the committee here, your decisions that you make as a committee are you don't have a lot of decisions you make. The main one is to approve and submit the annual report. But anytime the board members are meeting together to discuss business, or committee members are meeting together to discuss business, that would be considered in the public's interest per the Brown Act to have that meeting to be open in public.
I want to talk to him, but I want to call him tomorrow night and talk about something that isn't money.
I would want to get back to you on that because I don't want to provide you guidance that's not accurate. In fact, we can. Why don't I give some general information on the Brown Act so that everybody feels comfortable with what that looks like.
So Jermaine, it sounds like you might be wanting some sort of ad hoc committee to meet to discuss what will be a cover page to this particular report. Or I guess theoretically, ad hoc committee could come back and say, we don't want to submit this report the way it is. Is that what you would want to lean toward doing?
I didn't quite understand everything you said, but the point being that we need to, I believe, the committee members need to develop a report, which, as Ryan just showed, is a one-page thing, as opposed to the staff producing it. So the staff has developed all of these lovely reports for us, but there's a way for us to more or less certify that we ourselves are approving what we've been seeing.
Are we going to be compensated for this ad hoc work?
Just as much as we're compensated now.
Okay, then we'll see the staff gets paid to help us. So therefore I would not feel good about taking money from them. So if they're willing to do the work, that's their work. I want to protect that work for them.
No,
But as
I'm
a
looking.
volunteer,
I'm looking at the charter, the way it reads on our responsibilities.
Oh, okay.
So I would have to send you those documents, which at one point were going around the end of last year, what our responsibilities are. And our responsibilities are to develop the report. And again, it's just a one-page review of what we've seen. That's the best practice. And that the committee actually fills in that form, writes out that form and whatever, and submits it to the board along with what the staff has produced right here.
So just, sorry, Mr.
I tend to agree with Ms. Bruce.
I can't hear the gentleman, unfortunately, who just spoke. Your sound is really difficult.
He agrees with you.
Okay, thank you.
So it sounds like if you want to make a motion on this, you'll get a second on it. But we need to have, well, let's have some sort of specific direction.
Mr. Dane, before you do that, I think, are you asking about forming the subcommittee? Is that what you're asking?
I do not see, Ryan, if this is the way that the committee wants to go, that there would be any other way to do it. Somebody's gonna have to work in a small group where something like this can be developed and then bring it back for
Got it.
approval.
So
I can give you my personal, I actually, it does not bother me that staff prepares this. And I respect a lot California League of Bond Oversight Committees. I've been an advisor for them over time. And they really need those best practices in places like the Sweetwater Union High School District, for example. I felt that we've done a very good job here with oversight. We get good lists. And when we vote to approve it and go before the board, I felt from a district like this, that would be sufficient. But if people would feel comfortable with doing this best practice, that's okay. We just need to make sure, for example, if we do set up an ad hoc committee, people will be committed to actually showing up to the meeting and doing the work, because we're going to delay a vote through on this. I'm a little pressed for volunteer time, but let's see who would be interested.
So before we do that, I think the item is agendized is to just review the annual report. So any action that we're going to take beyond that, we'll have to bring that back as an agendized item. So what I'll do between this is I need to provide some, get some clarity around the development of the subcommittee, how that looks for this particular body, and then the parameters around that. And then we can agendize that at the next committee meeting. We can have the conversation. So we're able to make that.
Is anybody on the board crying out to get the annual report in immediately? I don't think so. So we have the time.
We can take our time.
If you do this research and you find out you can just set up a committee without having to come back here again, would it be useful for us to figure out now who would be on that committee?
Once again, I think, we don't want to violate the Brown Act. I think we're talking about something that might be related to reviewing of the annual report, but not necessarily. So I
Appointments
think,
might actually have to be agendized, wouldn't it, for even for now?
Yeah.
right.
Let's pause on the ambition.
Okay, well, we have time, and you know what? If the superintendent or the board says, you gotta bring this thing up, I guess we have to have a special meeting. Otherwise, that's, since they seem to be very happy with our work, I think we can wait on it.
Just to make sure that I'm understanding, I don't want to interrupt the flow of information. It sounds like you kind of put a pause on the subcommittee conversation.
Yeah, because you gotta check how this would be done, not to violate the Brown Act, and who knows, maybe there's some case law on this that would need to be checked.
Okay. My question here is that is the annual report that we're about to discuss just 4 of these put together, same concept, just bigger numbers?
Correct. So yes, and I should provide some brief history. So everything that you see in front of you, how the documents are presented, maybe not the colors, but everything else that you're seeing in front of you was grown from this committee. So initially started with some very high level overview and large paper packets. It had the updates. So the way that the information has looked from the inception of the Citizens Oversight Committee has changed over the years. And all of that's based on feedback and requests from the committee. So what you see is, what you ultimately see is a lot of work from your predecessors who gave their inputs and on how the ultimate format. So even though staff prepares it for the committee, it was based on all the feedback that we received from the committee and how it ultimately ended up.
But I want to point out that's format and not content.
The content as well. So there are certain things, I'd have to go back and look. I think this is my 5th year doing this, and it's grown a lot over our 4th year doing this. It's grown a lot over that. So the initial content has changed quite a bit from the content that we used to have. And so The whole warrant report, that is a new request. So that information wasn't presented. I think we started doing that maybe about 2 years ago, about 2 years ago. So that is new content that was requested.
All right, is everybody comfortable with the direction of staff on this matter? Ms. Jones, you're all set with what the next step is on this?
I didn't hear the last thing you said, Kevin, sorry.
You're comfortable that staff is aware of the next step and what they'll do?
Yes,
Excellent. Any other comments about the annual report review? Any public comments? All right, future meeting dates. We'll get these 3 dates that are up here. Is there any problems with those or problems with the schedule that you want to bring up?
But just one thing about the annual report, I forget who it was that brought up the concept of being able to like identify the color with the particular bond issue. And I would agree 100% that it's really hard to read. And maybe if under the dollar amount in the actual pie chart, it could be, you could label that 2011 Series A, 2015 Series B, or whatever it is. It's just hard to correlate to understand what I'm looking at here. I just want to affirm what that other person mentioned earlier about the format of this report just being a little tougher to read.
I've got it noted down.
Okay, thanks.
All right, we'll just stick with those future meeting dates and committee member comments. Does anybody have any comments about the work of the committee? How the construction program is doing, anything related to what's within our bounds and responsibilities? All right, we are adjourned.
thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
So,
Thank you.
thank you.